companies actually make it to an IPO stage.
Okay, we are live.
Yeah, I know.
So let's
amazing.
start.
It was an amazing experience. Yeah.
Yeah, let's start. Dear audience, it's a pleasure to welcome you on today Augst Cafe with our prominent guest speakers. Now, today we have with us Leart from Western Balkans and Jeff Tomlinson from the global perspective. Both of them are active on the global scene. My name is Alexander Stamboliev, and on behalf of the Western Balkan Startup Alliance, I will be the moderator for today. Just a bit of background for myself. I'm co-founder and CEO of the Accelerator team based in North Macedonia, in Skopje, and at the same time as of this year, I'm the National Secretary for the European Institute for Innovation and Technology. Without further ado, now I would like to go through today's cafe with our two guest speakers by going directly to present their experience, but from the perspective, what value you're bringing to your audience. So let's start with Leart, who is founder of Skin Agency and been working across countries, companies. Leart, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks a lot for having me. I'll start with hopefully what is the most valuable. We help companies, especially the fast scaling companies, set up for success. And that happens through basically supporting them throughout their journey of building the branding infrastructure that they need to support their scale. And to do that, we go through quite a bit of research process. We have psychologists in our team. We look at the data, we build the strategies, work very closely with their team. And that way they end up with not only sort of a short-term, beautiful looking thing, but more so with a ready-made team and marketing team for that scale up as they move forward. I hope that does it justice, but yeah. Sorry, Alexander, I think you're muted, or we can't hear you.
Yes, sorry. Just one question before we enter into the questioning into the debate. How many companies, countries you are working in?
Yeah, so we've so far worked in over 12 countries and more now probably. We've had over 150 clients. We've helped local sort of companies, scale up to 25 countries, 500 locations. We've helped European and non-European companies go from crowdfunding campaigns to becoming second largest in their industry vertical. So we've had almost everything in the spectrum of from very early stage startup to growing and getting out there. And so, yeah, we've had a lot of our clients are from the US, UK, Switzerland, and then a few local as well.
Okay, so this is a good intro that we are trying to encourage more the Western Balkan startups how to scale globally, and therefore we are having those cafes so we can inspire them and show them some directions how they can move forward. Thank you, Leart, for your introduction. Then Jeff, I met you, what was like 15 years ago, somewhere in Macedonia.
Roughly 2006, 2007, something like that.
Okay, so more than that.
I guess, yeah, somewhere in there. Yeah.
And over the last 15 years, you've been with different capacities.
Yes.
In your short bio, you shared is that over 25 years, serial entrepreneur, working as on the side of the investors, developing a company, and so on.
Do you want me to give a really brief background?
Yes, brief background about yourself.
All right. Well, I cut my teeth at GlaxoSmithKline, which is a large pharmaceutical company over in the UK, and it was mainly around project management. And they did a deal with this is way back, so 94, like the early 90s. So I did that. I was working for them for a couple of years, and then I moved over to the States with them, and then moved out of the science side of things or dealing with science into more business development, and that's where I spent most of my career. I moved into. I also did some venture capital investing. Worked at a company in Vancouver, and we made investments in startup companies from the 3 men and the dog, or 3 people and the dog nowadays. And we put money into them, $1 million to $5 million investment, and sat on their boards and tried to get them to move ahead. And then I switched gears and I actually moved into doing animation. That's why I moved to Macedonia. I was actually doing an animation company, which sounds a bit odd for someone that's in the science world to move over to animation, but it could be a bit of a midlife crisis, but it also could be the thing that the parts that I do, which is licensing and developing partnerships between companies. It doesn't matter whether it's Glaxo, Pfizer, or Disney, or whoever. It doesn't matter. There's still there's different risks for doing a license with each other, different partnerships, but it's still building the relationships, and that's really what I was doing anyway. Then I went back, and I think that probably the biggest thing I did in my career was start a company in Singapore called Aslan Pharmaceuticals. We started that in 2010. It was a cancer company focused on Asia prevalent disease. We took it public in the Taiwan Stock Exchange first in 2017. Then we took it again on the NASDAQ in 2018. So both stock exchanges, and that's just a way of raising money. And then actually, since then, I have actually moved back to Canada. So I'm in the great wild north of Canada. And I was looking after my father because he was getting a little bit demented. But now I am getting back into work. So I just now recently I'm actually just going back to doing licensing for companies between them, but as a consultant. That's my background. And what can I bring this audience? Is that the question?
Not to the audience you are serving.
The audience I am serving.
Yes, currently your audience probably is a company looking for licensing.
Yeah, my audience right now is I guess the way to put it is a company, probably small company, looking to license something that they have, a compound in development or compound that they've acquired, and they want to license it to someone else, to another region, to a large pharma, and get money from that instead of developing themselves or maybe co-developing it with the other company.
Okay.
That's what I'm doing now.
Yes, super. Thank you both. So now we can go to the next questions. And you both mentioned that you have been active in this region of Southeast Europe. What was your experience so far working with companies, talent, startups, scientists from Southeast Europe, especially Western Balkans?
Do I start, or Jeff?
Yeah, please.
All right. Well, I mean, it's been a very, very different experience from startup to startup, from company to company. I think one of the big things we see in the region is that big divide between the old school business people that have just come out of communism to the younger generation of startups, and these founders that are, well, I'll call them young because they're roughly my age, so I still like to call myself that. Not exactly, but I'll indulge myself. So within that bracket, where there's a big divide there, and it's very, I believe, at least it's been my experience, that it's very hard to talk to the older generation of business people around the conversation of branding, because it's a completely different life experience, completely different business experience. The conversation shifts a lot to the younger generation, but there seems to be some sort of a switch when we talk only about startups. So some sort of a difference between the countries that have more startup funding, be that from the government or other institutional funding, or versus countries that don't. And what I see in general is that countries that don't have that much funding, the startup founders tend to be much younger. They tend to be first-time founders, and honestly, they're just trying to build something to just get their idea out there. Whereas in the countries where there's a bit more funding, you'll see a lot more work when it comes to the idea of scaling and all that kind of stuff. There's also the separate part, which is serial entrepreneurs that are building their spin-offs or other ideas. And with that particular groups, there seems to be the biggest conversation around the brand, the scaling aspect. And because they've done businesses before, there seems to be more and more of an ambition to scale internationally. But generally speaking, I feel like there's a lot more to be done in us as a region. How do I put it? Get a bit of self-confidence in our ability to see our potential for international scaling, not only in services, I mean in products as well, because services, I believe, have done a pretty good job at that. So that's more or less been my experience in that.
Thank you, Leart. Jeff, of your experience working with the Macedonian animation community, can we start from there on? What's your experience? Were they delivering as good as the other
Well,
teams
you know,
globally?
I don't think that you can take a big broad brush and paint everybody in the Balkans the same way as one company. Um, and I also did other deals with companies that are in pharmaceutical industry that are in different parts of the Balkans, etc. But that's not I never lived in those countries. But I did live in Skopje for 9 months or so, working with one of the companies there on animation, as you know. One of the things that I really stress around building a company, a startup company, and doing stuff is that there has to be a certain level of trust between the people that are starting it. Without that, it doesn't matter. Like, it's a great idea, but if there's no trust between the founders, then it just doesn't work. And maybe there is a caboose to this train of thought. Okay, so just bear with me for a second. In When I lived in Macedonia, I had some friends that said to me one time, okay, you know what? I realized that what you do is you come in here, you trust people, and then you take it away if they don't do what they're supposed to do. And she's the main one said to me, we don't do that. We have to build trust. And that builds up trust, and then we keep that trust. But we don't give it to them automatically. And you're going to get in trouble for doing that. Like, it's going to get you into trouble being here. And I sit there and think about that, and that's it's a nice way to, if you build the foundation of trust before you do your startup, it's probably a better thing than the other way, which is, you give it to them and then they disappoint you, and you never end up really trust them again. So in that way, I think that you guys actually have a head start on North America and Britain, but I also look at it and think, what's the mentality around the startup people? Do they are willing to swallow the risk of failure? So it's one of the things I don't know about in your region, but it's one of the big things that makes America seem like it's a big machine for pumping out startups versus the Europe, which kind of does, but doesn't the same, not the same thing. So if you're a CEO in Britain and you fail, you're done. Like, it's a real bad thing. If you are CEO in the United States, and I say United States, I'm saying Canada, United States, but mostly the States. If you fail in the States, it means the next guys look at you and go, oh, they recognize a sinking ship. They know what it feels like to fail. They'll probably not fail this time. So you're not penalized for that. And I don't know what that's like in the Balkans. So you guys can tell me, but if you fail as a CEO, do you just get thrown to the side?
I would say to a certain extent, it's in our culture that is not glorified, as you just explained. Fail fast, so you can know how to fail, and then learn from that experience and build upon that experience in the new venture. So we are not far away from all the Southern Europeans, which are risk aware, liking to have the conformity and stability in our career path compared to what you just explained in the States. Identify the potential, move fast, create a team, work on the trust in order to move forward.
Yeah, like I said, trust is the biggest thing between the founders. If there's no trust, then that's not going to work. And trust in that, I don't mean trust as in they're going to steal your wallet. I mean trust in that they're going to do their job. They're going to do their bit. They're as committed as you are. That you can trust them you have your back if someone else is pushing really hard to oust you or do something that they don't want to the company. So I think that's where I mean trust. So you probably have founders along with you, right? And you hopefully you trust them, or otherwise quit now. In my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. No, 100%. Look, I mean, one of the things that always comes to mind is, so I'm in the service business, and for me, it's I think the idea of trust and relationship building is absolutely a lot more important than were I a product company, right? And the reason for that is that, you know, any service is like, you're going to have to spend a lot of time with that person. You need to understand them, and, you know, you need to model your service and your life for a while to theirs, right? And unless there's really good trust, and I'll say no to clients just because I don't feel like there's a good conversation going on. Because even if I may trust the other person, I just feel like, so we deal with psychology, right? And unless I can particularly know that I can communicate what needs to be communicated to that company in the way that they can execute, then I'm out, because my value there is zero, right? And I don't want to get into that situation where my value will be zero for that company, because then it's bad for me, right? Yeah. And unless there's that level of trust built before we start any sort of conversation, like any sort of collaboration, then absolutely it's a nightmare to work with. But to your point, I guess I would actually want to just go back for a second, because I thought that was really good that you brought the risk averseness to the conversation, as it being like one of the key factors to a successful startup ecosystem. Insofar as I've been able to see in the Balkans, there's a very different approach to risk overall. So first of all, definitely high risk aversion to a lot of people, and generally speaking is because of our history. Like, you know, we've really seen some stuff. And but it's very different when you look at Israel, where, you know, most people go to the army and they basically, their risk averseness drops because they've already gone. One of the determinants as to why Israel is called the startup nation is because everybody goes to the army and they're in a state of war. So people don't see failure in business as something interesting, because they've already been to the army, they faced kind of death, right? So there's a very big difference there. Whereas here, it's a bit different. It's different because we haven't only looked at war, but also at poverty. And because of that, there's a much higher risk aversion. However, there are individuals that really bounce up above that and completely outscore, I think, the rest. And we've seen a lot of very successful stories of people that have come from the Balkans and have been successful internationally. But as a culture, I think we need to start working a lot on that overarching story of you know, risk aversion, because otherwise we're going to have a hard time moving forward as an ecosystem. So. But I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think it's one of the key features of whether or not a startup ecosystem can be successful or not. So,
well, do you think you brought up Israel, and it says mandatory service, army service, right? National service, I think they might call it. Mm-hmm. It's you know, and you think that that's actually why that they're less risk averse?
So I think it's a combination of a couple of things, because the same thing doesn't happen in Switzerland. So it's very important, because Switzerland has the same law. But I think the difference is because in Israel, there's a high, well, it is a cultural thing as well, 100%. But I believe it is also because the proximity to danger is at all times there. That failing in business is not seen as risky as in the rest of arenas of life. And I believe that is sort of instilled within right. The society. Nonetheless, though, culturally, I think you know, Israelis have also had a good eye at business and at, you know, running a lot of the banks. Sure. And a lot of the, you know, so industry and all that knowledge has been transferred to the younger generations, which obviously helps. But I think there's a lot towards what's happening, and it's not completely by accident that it's called the startup nation. So I would fault a little.
I just want to add on that one. I think the army service brings them discipline, makes them aware of the emergency and necessity of action when there is an attack and when you need to take action. And they are the only one country which have the biggest conversion from military to civilian usage. Compared to US, we are spending billions of euros on different military equipment, but not necessarily the people involved in that process are finding a way how to transform that products and services to civilian usage. So there are multiple factors which are influencing why Israel is on the level where they are now. And they're even moving forward how to bring more capital within Israel before they move to California. So they will have more return on the investment within Israel before it went globally. So we are moving slightly to the next question, is that we touch upon the trust, the risk, So how we can introduce new instruments so we can create and support the startup ecosystems to scale globally. In this case, for Leart is the skin agency offering to those which are looking to create and position the brand globally. So besides having us, the Accelerator and hubs doing different things, in your opinion, what's needed to be added in this ecosystem, which are emerging, fragile, risk-averse, as an instrument?
I think
More funding available, more global mentors as you on disposal, more exposure to the global trends, more military actions. That's not my suggestion. It's just a joke.
National service.
Yes, definitely.
Brings in less risk. Yeah, maybe.
I mean, there's a combination of a lot of these things. I'll exclude the last one though, but we've had plenty of that. But I think well, I'll take the branding perspective, because honestly, I don't think well, I have the knowledge to speak of broader terms than that. But from one perspective, I believe that the Balkans being a relatively small area and with relatively small population, I think we need to look within ourselves as a community and to see what can we actually offer to the world, because we are very dispersed. I believe we are very dispersed. It's very for a startup from Balkans to think globally is very hard, because within their small network of people, there are rarely any companies that have done so. But if we look at the Balkans as a whole, there's going to be plenty of companies that you can gain information from. So it's not like we're complete losers that we've never done it before. The thing is, I believe we haven't connected enough into one value proposition and under one particular umbrella or a brand, I'd say, which could allow us to, if I am a founder looking to scale internationally, that I know where to go to just move my needle from today to tomorrow to the next one and to the next one. So I think that's one of the things we can do. In respect to helping startups grow globally, there's this general, I might dare to call it misconception, and I think Jeff might his experience might be otherwise. But in my experience with the companies that I've helped scale so far, it is very rare, unless it goes through direct partnerships, that a company scales globally right away. It usually happens country to country or region to region, right? And as a result, local companies oftentimes think of, oh, we're going to go global, and they throw some ads out there and expect for the miracles to happen, as opposed to looking at the very niche sort of cultures, understand those cultures, and then move to the next country, and then the next country, and then the next, to the degree that it may become global, right? So it very much depends on the approach. But to the approach that I'm talking about, we've definitely helped companies brand to the point where they get to understand the new audience, the new market, more so than they could otherwise, with lower risk and with definitely less money spent. And we've also helped companies sort of scale, well, globally through partnerships by using their partners network to go global. And in that respect, there's also a different approach to go by that. But I think communication is one of the core and fundamental aspects of scaling. And to that point, I believe that's why I actually loved what Jeff was saying about trust, because whether or not we're meeting those people, we still need to build that trust. And as humans, we generally build trust with people and cultures that we already know. So if we're going global, if I want to go to, let's say, America or the United States in particular, and my language sounds a little too British in my ads, it's probably not going to work because people don't trust someone who's foreign, regardless. It's just human nature, right? And so these are the couple of things that are important to be seen from a startup's perspective. And I'd be happy if any of the startups have any of those questions. I'd be happy to continue conversation as well.
Thank you, Leart.
So Jeff, I dropped some stuff on your plate there. I'm not sure if those resonate, but would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, the thing is, from my experience, that the one thing you're right. We don't generally. We have to learn to trust other cultures. We have to learn that, and there's things that are done differently, and we have to embrace those or not. And if we don't embrace them, then it's okay. is that detrimental to me, or am I going to switch what I do so that they'll actually take my product or help me build this company? That is a hurdle and is a challenge. I think with the internet and with things like what we're on now, which is StreamYard and Zoom and the number of them now, you get to meet people that are in all different places of the world without having to worry about it. And like soon, I'm hoping that soon somebody like StreamYard or Zoom or somebody will invent one of these programs where you can speak in your native language and it automatically translates it into what I can understand, or vice versa. I mean, it should have to be written down too, because otherwise there can be big mistakes if a computer makes something big mistake. But that I appreciate you guys speaking in English, and I think North America, generally speaking, we speak French. Some of us speak French, not me, but the Americans sometimes speak Spanish, and a lot of people speak Chinese. It's just the way it is. But I think that the language is something that is a hurdle, and I think that technology is going to drive us out of that. Same thing with Zoom. I've never met you before. I met Alex in real life, and that to me, and that's maybe old school, but I still think that meeting somebody, shaking their hand, maybe it's the smelling them or feeling their pheromone, whatever it is, you get a different sense of trust, and that builds up quite quickly compared to somebody that's on a computer, a face on a computer. And so I'm a strong advocate of, if you want to go somewhere, you should go somewhere. Like, yeah, it's great to have an interview like this. It's great to meet people online to discuss business, but if you really want to truly go internationally, I think you should get your butt on a plane and go to wherever you're going to go, and try and figure it out. If you don't speak the language, then you're going to need an interpreter, but you can still work that out. So that's a couple of the points. The other, obviously, I don't know the programs in North Macedonia or in the Balkans in general. I don't know what the programs are for startups. I don't know what monies are being brought in and are typically put into startups to get them going. Is there something like that and then a startup can actually just go there and get some money, or is there an incubator style? Or I don't know enough about it to comment on that. In Canada is a little bit different than the United States, and Canada is much more risk averse country than the United States. They have incubators here. A lot of the universities have incubators. There's some innovation things that the government puts out that startups can go and use the space. There's some grants that they can get, not big ones, but just to get them going, get a computer or two or hire somebody. So I don't know enough about how much the programs are in the Balkans. So maybe Alex can talk about that.
Not sufficient, I would say.
Well, it's probably never sufficient. It's probably never seems sufficient. But how much does somebody need as a startup? Well, it depends. Of course, it'll depend on which style of company you're making. So, is it cost more in a biotech company to get it started than it does in a branding company? Probably much more. Especially if you're going to throw in laboratories in there, it's a whole different ballgame. I think that in the Balkans, so my experience is mostly in the pharmaceutical industry, the biotech industry. But the one company I worked with in North Macedonia, they actually trained, the heads of that company trained in LA, went back to North Macedonia, it was Skopje, and then they built a company out of that. And they had international connections because of that, because they left and went and got trained in Los Angeles on how to do things. And then they eventually, I think from what I gather, I haven't talked to them in years, but from what I gather, they've sold out their company and made a good amount of their money. And they did some really great stuff. And I think that's one thing those are two things. One, the training, is the training adequate for the people that are trying to start companies in the Balkans? I don't know. You would probably know better than I. The other thing is that go somewhere, train, and then come back. That's actually So that wins everywhere. It seems to win everywhere. There's a fellow friend of mine that is from India, trained in Singapore with us, and then he gone back to India. He's very successful in India now. I'm not saying they can't do it homegrown, but it just seems to help push things along. Probably because of the experience of the people that they're dealing with outside of the country. I would say that's another big thing, but I guess how do you push it out? I think that the government's going to have some sort of startup. So maybe, Alex, you could talk just a bit about what the procedure would be. Like if I wanted to come to Skopje and start a startup, and I said, okay, I've got this. This is my business plan. This is a couple of guys or people that are coming with me. Is there funding available for me?
So usually, like any other country in the world, when there is state funding involved, you need to partner with the locals. So the locals will have at least 51% ownership over the company.
Okay, so me and you are starting a company. Okay.
Yes. So then we apply either the National Fund for Innovation and Technology Development or at some of the accelerators, as I'm running the Accelerator Rukim. If selected, then you are available. You can have from 50,000 euros to a few €100,000 over a period of few years. But what is lacking that the business angels are not sufficiently trained on how to recognize the potential from technology-based startups. As Leart explained, the people which have capital are usually older, having different mindset coming from the previous system and how they develop the business, so they cannot see the potential investing in something what they completely don't know. So that's the first challenge: how to train more wealthy people to see the opportunity, to join together in order to start what I'm saying, gambling on the ideas of others. Because at the end of the day, it's a high debt rate among the startups. So you need to be ready that some of your investee will be debt, and they need to shut down the business, and then to be quick to find which are the pioneers, so you can even push them more if you have the capacity as an angel investor. Then on the scale of funding, what we are missing is the real VC funds. Only one open to both Kosovo, Macedonia, and Western Balkans is the South Central Venture, which is EU-based backup VC fund, and the other ones which are present here are pushing us to move the company on some of their territories. It's usually EU-based, and not always the startups which not sufficient funding from 50 to a few $100K are having the sufficient confidence and product ready to move to a new territory with living and further development. And then creation of small boutique VC funds which can fill that gap, which is from 200-300K to $500,000, which is identified that in most of the countries you can get something between 50 and 100, either from the national fund or from different donors grant schemes. But reaching the real pre-seed VC funding, which goes from $500,000 and above, there is a huge gap. So even if you come to Macedonia, to go back on your example, and if we manage to raise 50 to 200K, and then we need further funding, we need to move the company somewhere,
right,
in order to get the funding.
Or you can get a subsidiary somewhere to get the funding. That works. So one of the things in Canada did that I thought was actually pretty good. It didn't, over the long haul, it didn't work out. But when a person or a angel investor, whoever invests in a startup company, there's a huge amount of failure in those startups because they're unproven and they start up and then they go, and they a lot of them don't make it. So they're taking a big chance there. So what Canada did was they set up a fund where it was publicly funded. So mom and pop can put money in, the angels can put money in, whoever wants to put money in can do it. And the government would give them a tax incentive to do that. So they get 35% of their money that they put in over a couple of years. So essentially, whatever money they put in doesn't cost them anything if they leave or if they lose it. And what that did was it built up a fund that, it had 100 million at the time, and that can then make significant investments in a number of startups and beyond that, and they can follow on investments as well. So Series A, Series B, it would walk away at Series B, but that to me it spreads out some of the risk for people that want to invest, but it also allows for the companies to have a bigger pot to get their money from. Just a thought. It worked in Canada for a while.
Thank you, Jeff, for bringing this out. None of the countries in the Western Balkans have these incentives. I think besides Montenegro, which have some incentives on the corporate tax, and that's how they're creating a small VC fund. But that will be great motivation for everybody who has extra 50 to 500K and would like to try their luck being an investor, that they will get 35 or even more percentage of their investment subsidized by the state in different taxation schemes.
It's not subsidized by the state so much as it's just backstopped so that the government may not get that money back because it's a credit. It's not a tax credit, but it saves the people who are not really losing anything. It's kind of like they gave it to the government, but the government isn't taking it. So anyway, just a thought. That's one of the things that you could do the government would do. So pull together something that includes all the Western Balkans, if you wanted to say, like all of them, so you can invest from all of them. But it might be too difficult because there's sometimes I don't think that all the Balkan states get along as well as they should. Sometimes.
Yes. Sometimes, very rarely, or very often, depending with whom you are trying to partner with, the first neighbor or the second neighbor.
Yes, that's right.
So, Jeff, as you're still on the scene, I would like to ask you why you choose Singapore with your buddy to establish the company. And please elaborate more on all the steps you went through to raise $250 million in different funding opportunities and the two IPOs you.
That's a big question there, Alex. That's a super huge, long question. I give you the easy one for Singapore. The easy one for Singapore is that we were our business plan was really to take drugs from the West, so Europe and North America, and apply them to Asia prevalent cancers. So Asia prevalent cancers, 900,000 people die every year in Asia from stomach cancer, and 30,000 people die every year in North America. And it's not just due to the extra people in Asia. It's actually just they don't even know what it is. It's diet, it's genetics, it's a bunch of combinations. Anyway, our idea was Singapore is kind of built itself to be the Switzerland of Asia. It's English speaking. It's a financial. It's got lots of financial institutions. It takes all the money from Asia and funnels it out towards the rest of the world. And I'm saying that nicely, but Singapore is the gateway to Asia, and that's why we were there. And they gave us some incentives to be there. So and they do actually. They have national service. So just so you know. 2 years national service, men and women, anybody 18 till 20. So that's one thing. So what we did, it started off with an idea that the CEO, he ended up being the CEO. His name is Carl Firth, and he was a banker with Merrill Lynch, and he used to work with a friend of mine, Mark McHale, who ended up being the COO or CSO of the company, Chief Scientific Officer. And Mark and I were talking to Carl about this business plan. We worked together, make this business plan, something like that, that would be feasible to be funded. We then put money in ourselves. So we actually put in there was 4 initial investors, founders. Ross Horsberg was one of them. He was an MD, so he was going to be our CMO, so Chief Medical Officer. we formed the company, gave out founder shares to everybody. Big mistake that there was no clause holding that in, because after 3 months, Ross decided to leave and take his founder shares with him. And, of course, there's nothing you can do about it. But one good thing that Ross did was he introduced us to Alan Barge, who really replaced him as a founder for Aslan. And he was a guy out of AstraZeneca. He was a doctor that did cancer out of AstraZeneca, global head of oncology for AstraZeneca. So the four of us basically built that company up. We put in $250,000 each. So we ended up with $1 million or so with just the four of us. And then we went out to friends and family and said, okay, grandma, opened up your purse, give us some more money, and went to all these people. And we ended up with 2.2 million from going out to people and asking for money. Then we decided to all move to Singapore, and we got some money from local VCs, Temasek, and it was really there to help out Singaporeans, like Singapore companies, and we were a Singapore company. And then, of course, it's just a series of, once you raise money, you spend the money, and you have to keep on raising more money. So really, the CEO, we all just sort of divvied up what we needed to do. Carl's background was banking, so we made him the CEO. I don't know what happened.
We might have lost him.
Everybody's boring the tears out of him, eh?
Not really.
So
I wouldn't expect
I'm
so.
just going to keep going because he might have gone, but everybody's still there. So
yeah,
I think the four of us each represented a different pillar in what was the foundation of the company. So Carl's the financial guy. He's the banker. Mark is a PhD scientist, and he was a clinical guy. So he was doing clinical trials. You need a chief medical officer. So that was Alan Barge. And then there's me, who does the business side of things. So we in-licensed all our compounds. I did all that. Carl managed he did most of the pitches for the VCs, and I would go along with them, or Mark, one of us or all of us would go along trying to bring money in. We brought in, it wasn't always, we brought in 2 million from friends and family. We brought in 10 million after that from a different group out of Hong Kong. And then we brought in 40 million from groups in the States. And then we expanded out. The next one, we went out and got it from all over the place, VCs all over the place. So Europe, North America, some in China, or rather Hong Kong, not China. And then when you go public, of course, you raise money on the public forum, and that was at Taiwan Stock Exchange. I learned a lot from these things, from doing this. And one, you make sure that your founders they have enough shares to make them feel comfortable, but you also put some little clause in there to make sure that they don't just run away, change their mind, or they can give it back. I mean, that's the gist of it. Then also going out on the Taiwan Stock Exchange first before we went out in the NASDAQ was not the smartest idea. There's a lot of things in different stock exchanges that are a little bit more hidden and stricter than even like NASDAQ. And the place to go is NASDAQ, I would say. You could go on London Stock Exchange, but really you want to go, I would say, on the NASDAQ. That's the place for biotech anyway. I don't know if a branding company would go public or not to raise money.
Usually not. Usually not. So branding company goes on service. It's harder to raise. We usually would spin off a product or something like that and run after that.
Yeah.
So I guess until Alex comes in, well, he is here.
There he is. There he's back now.
I run away. I think watch out, your co-founders not to run away with money. Unfortunately, my internet ran away, so I was dropped down from the net. Sorry.
That's all right. I continued on. And so we went public in NASDAQ, and what's also interesting though is, so we went from a company that was worth 80 cents a share. We just determined that's what it'd be worth. We got one compound in, and we had some guys and an idea, so we just threw it up in the air and said it's 80 cents a share. So it was really worth like $3 million. And then at the peak, when we went out on NASDAQ, we were sitting at around $37 a share. And I left in 2019, the end of 2019, and Mark McHale, the chief scientific officer, he left shortly thereafter. And the company now is sitting at $2 a share, $2.10 a share. So it's really gone down over the past 3 or 4 years. And one of the challenges that I really see is that a company needs the founders to be present. Like they have to. When I wasn't there, Mark and Carl can't get along, and I was in it. Like when you have to have all these pillars filled, and if you don't fill them up right away, then things go bad. And it's the reason why the company, in my opinion, is not true, but the company is faltering is because they don't have people that can actually push back. Like the board's supposed to do that. It in my opinion didn't do that, and the company's now struggling to stay alive. And it's a real shame when a legacy that you build for 10 years all of a sudden goes down the tubes because, people that are CEOs of companies that go on NASDAQ get some egos. And, Carl's a good guy. He's a very, very smart guy, but everybody has to remember that they are not them themselves. That old story, the king has no new clothes or something like that. The emperor's new clothes, where he's naked and there's something and nobody told him except for a child. Do you remember that story or no? That fairy tale?
Yeah.
So that's what happens with some of the companies. It just, the CEO gets headstrong and just doesn't listen to the people around him or her. So that happens in governments too. We have that problem in Canada.
I mean, we had so this is kind of I'm hijacking the conversation here for a second.
Go for it.
It was funny because we had a similar situation. We were working with a company that had recently raised Series B, I think, and they got a new CEO, and the founder did not get along with the new CEO at all. So he was the previous CEO, and so we had we were called to rebrand them, and because they'd just gotten this new raise, they needed to reposition, go on to new markets, all that kind of stuff. New CEO. It was a struggle. So we had to revisit the vision and the mission and all that kind of stuff before we even went into anything that's brand related. And fortunately for me, our psychologist went in and we just had the first conversation, and he was like, nope, this needs to be done differently. We literally did couples therapy type of tactics with the two founders until we got them to agree on a vision statement and on a couple of core aspects that they want to agree with. And then we could move forward. But it went down to, going to good old couples therapy, which obviously they didn't know we used exactly that. But we were using that in the meetings to be able to get them together, because it was a nightmare, and they just couldn't work together. So it's interesting to see down how many levels the conversation between founders is important, and not just within that sort of decision-making room. It's more so in day-to-day and everything else. So it's very, very good you bring that up, actually. So
yeah, for sure.
So is there any recipe how to keep co-founders accountable with ego down in order to move the company more up and global? Or there is always the case then when somebody becomes more powerful than the others and then is jeopardizing the positions of others? Is this a very open case where the companies failed because of the lost trust within the co-founders, lost power position within the co-founders, misinterpretation of the mission and vision, or not adjusting to the new circumstances once you go up in fundraising and becoming more global?
Well, I think there's a challenge with whenever the head of a company, so the CEO of a company, doesn't listen to the people around them. It's one thing, you have to be a leader. I get that. So you have to sometimes make decisions, but you should listen to all the information and then make a decision, and with the help of the board. So that's also the thing. And so it's really up to the board to keep the CEO from sucking up into their own mind and deciding that they're the right thing to do. I would blame the board is supposed to do that to keep the CEO on the straight and narrow. And the thing is, around the CEO, every CEO should have to listen to people around them. So I don't know. Why do companies go down? A lot of them, I think there is a problem with the egos and listening to people or not. At least that's what my experience has been.
Yeah, and well, my experience. So my first startup failed mainly because of that. So, for me, it was more like I figured out that despite your best abilities, it's just, and I mentioned that actually even before in this conversation when you were talking about trust. I think it's about how well you click with a particular person. Like if there are two co-founders and their decision-making processes or like their decision-making status is pretty much equal, then I think it's down to how well you trust, how much you trust each other, how well you know each other, and how much do those personalities line up when it comes to taking those decisions. I think that's a big part of it, and another big part of it is how mature you are as a person to build some layer of marriage with that counterpart, right? Because there's going to be problems and all that, and the ability to communicate through that and realign, I think is crucial to moving forward. At least that's been in my experience. If the language of if the language is different from between these two people, then it becomes impossible, despite their best abilities or despite their best intentions. It's just a matter of how well you can communicate and align, I guess, on what those thoughts are. And sometimes it's just a matter of personalities more so than ego. Although oftentimes it is ego, but sometimes I believe it's also a matter of personalities.
Yeah, could be.
Mm.
You need them all, though. You need those people to get it going. You need the fire to get it going, but that also can turn around and bite you at the end, right?
Yeah, definitely.
It looks like Alex is gone again.
Yeah.
I don't see him on there anymore. Do you want to skip to the next? We're running out of time as well. So do you want to skip to some other questions?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, we could do that, or I could ask you a question. Actually, I was quite curious about that as you were talking about. So, I mean, I hope the people watching would be interested in it. So, but there he is.
Please proceed with the question, Leart.
All right. So, I actually just wanted to ask, like, so you've scaled a company tremendously, and I really want to know, looking back at it now, your business model might not, was different, all that kind of stuff. But I want to know, what was the importance of brand, and how did you, throughout the scaling journey, and when do you think it was most important to have a consistent and well-defined way that the company is presented and perceived by the audience, whichever one that is, be that investors or customers?
Well, right from the get-go, you need, if you're going to go out there and look for money from VCs or going out to customers, what do they do? They go to the web, they look at you, look what your company's about. They look at your website. So having a decent website and a decent logo, absolutely number one, should be right out of the box. And you would know that, right? That's what we did. And in actual fact, our first website was, we kind of cobbled it together out of, I think it was Dream something with Adobe. So we did it ourselves.
All right, Dreamweaver,
yes. And
yeah,
but we also I drew the logo. So I drew the logo for the company. So that's the stage in which we were at, where you just need something. Now the logo's stuck, but the website's gone way gone. But there's it's essential to have a really nice website, and it needs information that people will need. And okay, let's say we have this conversation, but you're trying to sell me a service, then I want to see what you've done. So you can also have links to some of the things that you've done, or even your website has stuff on there. You need that. So I would say right from the get-go, that's one of the biggest things, because if you're going to attract investment, how else are you going to do that without a brand? Like, it doesn't have to be forever brand either.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, so what I'm finding, and I've done quite a few customer interviews lately, and most startups start like that, with free stuff, right? They just do a free logo, anything for free that they can. Post Series A or post seed money, they'll actually start investing. But what I'm also finding is that for a lot of companies, branding accounts to up to 30% of their valuation later on. they're mainly talking to B2C, right? And sometimes even more when it comes to really B2C. I'd be curious to know, did that play any role in the valuation of the company later on, like the trust that the brand had built with the customers, or was it more around the product?
So our company, it's a little bit different business. Like it's not that kind of thing. You know, it's not that we, you know, they didn't really rely on, you know, oh, that's Aslan Pharmaceuticals. They really relied on, they know us, like whoever we dealt with, they would deal with us personally and they would know us. So building up those relationships was more important. But that's the biotech industry. So in animation world, the company was called Big Wonder, and we had a logo, and I love the logo. It's a little boy standing in the middle of a doorway, looking out into the world, this bright yellow world, and it was actually much more necessary for the people that were doing animation to know that, to see that, because they associate certain work with a brand, work like so a service so our original business model for that company was we would take boring stuff in animation and take it off of people like Disney or companies like Disney, and then we would move that somewhere like Macedonia. So we get an animation company in Macedonia to do it. We do or do it in Prague or do it in India or wherever. We had animation companies all over the world that would do this for us, and then we'd get they had to, at the time they had to paint sets by hand, kind of thing, and all the guys in LA would charge $1,000 a day, but they don't really want to sit around. They want to do animation. They want to do the characters. They want to do design. They don't want to be painting a road or the wall of some set, you know. So they would give that to us, and we would do that and give it back. Now that's where that brand was very important, because they're putting that around to other executives to say, okay, well, we did this with these guys. You want to do it with your guy, with your project, and that made a big difference. So I think it depends on the sector as well.
100%.
So, but you know about much better than I do about who needs brands and who doesn't. But everybody, the 30% on your brand is really important, but that's also way down the line. Like,
yeah, exactly.
You know, everybody knows what that swoop is on a shoe, right? Right. I mean, just know what that is. But I mean, that's what people try to do. They try to get it so that consumers will look at it and say, "Hey, I know that brand. I know the quality of that brand. I know the style of that brand. So I'll buy it again." It's a huge thing. Huge.
Thank you both for lively discussion and also for continuing the discussion without my presence. So you did a great job on our cafe. As we are approaching our 60 minutes of discussion, we would like to keep you more, and also our audience. I would like you to ask for your final statement. What shall we do to discover the inner motivation for innovation? Because each one of us can contribute in some matter. Is the team relevant? How to find a complementary body? How to build trust? To wrap up in a way of what we are discussing, then I suppose you will be open for our participants if they would like to reach out to you with some proposals, for Leart if they want to have your branding support, and to Jeff if they would like anyhow to collaborate with you in sense of the part of the biotech and animation. So let's wrap it out and give motivation to our Western Balkan startup community how to move forward, step by step, country by country, continuously teaming up with relevant co-founders.
You know, I think that what people do sometimes is they try to reach out too fast. So if you build a really good product or build a really good service, it doesn't matter really where you are nowadays. I think that's the main thing, building that quality service. And how do you do that? Well, if you can do it something that can compete globally, okay. So then it's going to be a valuable commodity globally. But if it's something local, it's probably not going to be competing globally. But I think that's one thing. You have a good business plan, a short business plan, and something very simple. That's the easiest way. If it gets complicated, it'll fall off track. But I think that, I started companies all my life, and it's fun, it's hard, and it's scary. And, the thing is that the alternative is to work for somebody. That's not so much fun. So there you go. I would do it.
Yeah. I guess to echo that is like, do what comes first. Let's do the homework as much as we can. For the rest of it, in one of the conversations, I have this podcast, and one of the conversations, the guy bring this sentence up, and he's like, well, I think in his LinkedIn is execution eats strategy for breakfast. Now, and I love that sentence, and I think all that needs to be done is execute. And I think that kind of also echoes what Jeff was saying, execute on a good product. And once that is the case, then I guess the rest will follow. So that's all there is, I guess.
Yeah, that I saw that podcast, that part of that podcast, and it reminded me of. Sorry, Alex, do I have a few minutes or a minute?
Yeah, please go ahead.
It reminded me that I lived in Britain for a while and working for a company, but I know how people work in North America, and I know how they work in Britain. I'm not going to say Europe, but in Britain. And strategy eats execution. No, execution eats strategy for breakfast, right? Okay, so
Correct.
If I gave a team of Americans and said, build me this widget by the end of the week, and I gave the same thing to the British, what I noticed the big difference is the British will, on Monday, they'll plan, Tuesday, they'll plan, Wednesday, they'll plan, Thursday, they'll plan part of the day, they'll finalize their plans, they'll execute, and on Friday, it'll be 100% great. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
The US, they will not plan very much. They will try something and fail on Monday. They will try something else new and push ahead but fail on Tuesday. Do the same thing on Wednesday, push ahead but fail. And then on Thursday, they will have learned all their mistakes, and they'll build the thing, and they'll go, no, don't go down that road, don't do this. And then by Friday, they will come up with the thing exactly the same as the British do, but they know it differently. They've done and failed, where the British just look at it and hone in and then just do it. So I don't know if I agree with your friend's statement. It just depends on the culture you're in.
Fair enough. I found a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times in Balkans, there's, you plan on Monday, you plan on Tuesday, review on Wednesday, take a break on Thursday, and by Friday, it's Friday because you're going to party. So I'd say execute, even if it's not the best one, at least there's something, and you started, right? So that's why I wanted to bring that up. But yeah, agreed. It very much depends on the culture and the way you want to do things. So
yeah, it's actually so I've done business in a lot of different places in the world, and it is actually very different the way you deal with different companies and different people and different licenses, different stuff, because the way that they deal with stuff is so different. You pay the Japanese to do a certain thing for you, it's done. You pay the Indians, they're gone. I mean, but they can both do the good product, but you just have to pay them differently. You pay them when they're done, or pay them when it doesn't matter. Like the Japanese.
Yeah.
I've just used that. We learned that mistake in India. That maybe that's changed over the past years, but I doubt it. But all right, I'm chatted out.
Yeah, same here. I mean, if anyone wants to reach out, I'd be happy to connect through LinkedIn or through the website. I'm Ogjani. The name is somewhere, well, here or here. It depends on where it's showing up. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. Be more than happy to chat. So,
thank you both for joining our cafe. With guests like you, we are trying to inspire our community, and hopefully with different instruments, support services, branding support, and access to the global market, the startups will find their way to scale up step by step globally. With this, I would like to thank you again for your participation. Thanks our participants through both channels which are live now, and that we are going to share the video recording on our social media. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Alex.
Right.
All right. See you. Nice to meet you, Leart.
Great to meet you. We'll connect later, I guess, again.